Hi, and welcome to this edition of Fresh Hope for Mental Health. Our mission here at Fresh Hope for Mental Health is to empower you to live well in spite of your mental health challenge by sharing insights through interviews, practical tools for living well, encouragement, and courage for overcoming all from a Christian perspective. And now, here's your host, Pastor Brad Hafes.
Hello, my friend, and welcome to Fresh Hope for Mental Health. I'm Brad Hafes, your host. Our purpose here on Fresh Hope for Mental Health is to empower you to live a faith-filled, rich, and full life in spite of having a mental health diagnosis. Today on this podcast, I have with me Dr. Matt Stanford. He's the CEO of Hope and Healing Center and Institute in Houston, Texas. He's also an adjunct professor in the Menninger Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences, at Baylor College of Medicine. And his research on the interplay between psychology and issues of faith has been featured in such publications as the New York Times, USA Today, and Christianity Today. He's well known for his two books, Grace for the Afflicted, A Clinical and Biblical Perspective on Mental Illness, as well as The Biology of Sin, which I really appreciated. And I'm fortunate to call him a friend. I don't know if he calls me a friend, but he's my friend, and I'm glad to have you here on the podcast today.
Thanks for having me, and I do call you a friend.
Would you mind telling our listeners about what you do and what you're doing at the Hope and Healing Center in Houston?
Yeah, the Hope and Healing Center is a comprehensive mental health resource for the Houston community. We offer direct services to individuals primarily that have serious mental illness or problems with addiction. We offer about 40 support groups a week, as well as individual services and then also telepsychiatry services. All of our services are free, so we see a very diverse and wide range of individuals, but we don't discriminate based on income. People with insurance and with money come here, as well as people that don't have insurance and don't have money. So we see all comers. We take an integrated approach to care in which we incorporate faith into our care. And we also offer programs for the Houston community. We have about 50 programs a year, all types of mental health issues, how to live with bipolar disorder, how to take care of loved ones with dementia, different types of programs. We also do research. We have a research institute where PhD level research fellows do research mostly around access to care, but all with an eye to equipping faith communities. And finally, we do faith community training. We have a program called Gateway to Hope that goes into faith communities and trains them to better minister to individuals with mental health care, really equips them to become a real front door to the mental health care system.
Talk to me about that one. Is that just for churches in Houston or for those that are listening that might be interested in having something like Gateway to Hope?
Yeah, right now as far as going into the churches and actually doing the training there, it's just the Houston and the surrounding area. I think we drew a line maybe 30 miles outside of Houston that we're willing to go out of Houston to do. We are trying to focus it in an single community so that we can get a measurable change in access to care
Sure.
and in hospitalization. We are working on an online platform right now called the Mental Health Gateway. So if your listeners go to mentalhealthgateway.org, which there's just a kind of a beta site up right now. The main site, the actual site's going to be going up soon. There's just kind of a tester site up there right now. But that's going to offer all types of information and videos and downloadable resources and databases to get individuals to care. So that's going to be kind of our first move out into kind of a national opportunity for people to get some type of training and connection. Ultimately, I think we will be able to offer the services on a national level, but right now we're focusing on a single community.
Sure, which makes sense. But it's certainly the whole idea of what you're doing with Gateway to Hope is really then, in a sense, you're equipping the church to help others access mental health services in their communities, right?
Absolutely. It's,
Yeah.
the people in psychological distress are more likely to go to a clergy before they go to a mental health care provider. I mean, that's a statistic that the government has demonstrated. And so since we know where people are more likely to go first, and since we know that a majority of people with mental health problems never receive any treatment, we want to try to go to those places first and equip them to be like a real entry point into care.
Absolutely.
And so as opposed to, what happens now, which is a lot of places either just don't recognize that there's an issue or that it's a mental health issue, or they just really don't know what to do, even if they recognize it.
Absolutely. And so those of you who are listening who might be leaders or pastors in your church, or maybe you're someone with a diagnosis or you love somebody, that's a place to go and help your congregation, your church, your ministry, in fact, become part of a movement, really, that meets a huge need in every community. I was telling a pastor down in Houston this past week, I said, has your senior pastor preached on mental health issues ever or within the last year? And the answer was no. And I said, well, when the hurricane hit, was your church greatly affected when Harvey hit? No, was the answer. I said, did he preach on that? And he said, yes. And because it affected the community, I said, well, mental health affects, et cetera, et cetera. So it's amazing how that works. But hopefully that will take off and you'll be able to do it nationally and help many churches that way. Question, what is the research showing that you're doing? Do you have any information for us in regards to that?
A lot of the research we do is around peer-delivered services. There really aren't enough mental health care providers, and there never going to be enough mental health care providers. We need to give up this kind of false idea that we're going to, that we'll be able to train enough. We're just not going to be able to do that. Just like we don't have enough nurses, and we're never going to have enough nurses. And so peer-delivered services are a real opportunity. Because research has shown that peer-delivered services can effectively deliver certain levels of mental health care in an effective way. And so we do a lot of work around that. And so we have found that, for instance, a CBT-based peer-delivered curriculum that we have, 64% of individuals that complete that program, it's about a 6-month program. These are people with serious mental illness, have significant clinical improvement. And so, if peers can deliver services, we just save a lot of money. It's much easier to do. Also been doing a lot of work around, things like what are called warm lines, as opposed to a hotline. A hotline you call one time when you're in crisis. A warm line is something you can call multiple times. You can get support there as well as information on referrals that can help you get to the care you need. And so we are looking at some of that. We've been looking at some of the warm lines around the country. There's a few of them. There's not very many. And also, kind of looking at some kind of new ways for the delivery of service. So, for instance, instead of a centralized place where individuals come to get treatment, what if treatment came to your house? So instead of a crisis team, it would be a team that would come to your house to deliver service, but not when you're in crisis, just when you're just in the program.
Right.
And so, these are just, in that way you're integrated the individual into the community, and it takes away a lot of the barriers like transportation and things like that, and stigma of walking into a mental health care center. So we've been looking at some different things like that.
There's countries that do that sort of thing too, right?
Absolutely.
They're doing that, and they've got, is it Australia or where is it that, and they've got very good.
I know in some of the Baltic region and maybe Australia, and again, it actually can be less expensive, believe it or not.
Yeah.
And so, basically the therapist office becomes a car, and you're sending a therapist and a caseworker to, meet with people. It's just a different way of thinking. I mean, really what we're trying to do is we're trying to think. We're not trying to fix the system we have, because it's not really a system. We're trying to rethink the way that services can be delivered.
Oh, yeah.
And incorporating peers, lower level providers, so that there's many more steps before you actually get to a high level provider or actual hospitalization. Another thing that we're looking at right now with one of the hospitals here in town is the idea of some type of recovery home, which can be used as a place where you would go to try to keep yourself from being hospitalized, or as a step down out of hospitalization.
Exactly, because that's really, especially after hospitalization, the insurance stops paying and boom, you're out of the hospital and
Right.
you're not really ready to go home.
The readmission rates within the first 2 weeks are just unbelievable.
I know. Well, I'm very excited to hear about many of these things, and you and I haven't had a chance to personally for me to catch up on these. So selfishly, I'm very happy to talk about these things. You just mentioned CBT, I believe. Something about the 6-month training or the CBT. Could we rewind just a little bit? And what is CBT or whatever it was that you said, and the training for people with serious mental illness?
Yeah, we use a cognitive behavior therapy, which is it's more of it's not what people think of as kind of a therapy where you sit down and someone asks you how your mother is and you're looking for some past experiences.
Right.
Because we're dealing with people with serious mental illness. I mean, they have some neurobiological issue going on, and and they need symptom reduction, and they need tools and skills to be able to control those symptoms. And so that's what cognitive behavior therapy does. And so you can take some of the principles of cognitive behavior therapy. Many of them are, in fact, maybe like at a simple level, something like learning a relaxation technique, like paced breathing or something that can be used in cognitive behavior therapy. And you can have a peer deliver that. You can train just anyone to deliver some of these services. And so we have a curriculum that I've written, and I wrote originally with Joe Padilla of the Grace Alliance. And so we train an individual from each congregation that we train, that we go in and do Gateway of Hope with. And then they can see the people individually there and work them through this curriculum. And, we find that curriculum, people that complete it, 64% of them are showing a significant clinical improvement, which is just amazing, because they're getting that improvement and they're paying $0.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Now,
did
you say that was 6 weeks or 6 months?
It's 6 months.
It's 6 months.
Once a week for 6 months.
And what is that called?
23 visits. It's called, we actually call it's right now it's called Thrive, but we're in a big revision right now, and that name will probably change. But by the end of the year, we'll have it completely revised. But it's what we call the Thrive curriculum.
Now, is that...
we actually, once it's, the revision is done, hopefully early next year, we're going to start to make it available on our website. People can People be able to purchase it on the website and then work through it on their own or with their loved ones.
Great. Now, is that different than the Grace Alliance groups, or what you and Joe created with the groups, the X amount of weeks long?
It is different. It's more intensive, and that we also have the groups. Our groups are a little different than the Grace groups are. It's based off that same material, but we call ours transformed groups. But the groups are about 13 weeks long, and and it's in a group format. You do follow a curriculum. Some of the material overlaps, but you certainly can't get as focused and intense in a group as you can in individual care. So, but the groups are, we've done a lot of research, and I've published a number of things around the groups are extremely helpful in reducing symptoms and in building up the person spiritually. All of these things that we're talking about are faith-based as well.
Sure. Let's talk just a little bit about what kind of take do you have, if you will, on mental health in the church today? It would seem like we've come a little ways, but kind of give me your bird's eye view of it.
Yeah, I think that we have this statistic that tells us people are more likely to go there first. So this isn't an issue of whether the church, quote unquote, needs to get involved, or is this a topic area or a need in the community that the church needs to jump into. The church is already fully immersed in this. Yeah. They just don't realize it. So, and so it's like, it's not like do we need to start a human trafficking ministry? The church that you go to, it's possible that there could have been a young woman that's been trafficked that went there, but it's also possible that no one in that church has ever been trafficked at all, or
Right.
even knows anyone that's been trafficked. But I can tell you right now, there isn't a church in America that doesn't have people with mental illness in
Yeah.
the church, and doesn't have families in the church that have people with mental illness in them. So the church is fully immersed in this already. People are going there first, seeking some type of assistance. So as far as where we are as a church here, in the U.S. with it, I mean, I think that, a conversation has started. I would say at least it started. I mean, I think, a number of years ago, I would say the conversation had even started. I remember going around and doing presentations, and it was pretty lonely out there, trying to get people to listen. And
Yep.
so, a conversation has started now, and you see more. There's certainly a lot of seminars and conferences where people get together, and a lot of times it's you and me, or you and me and Amy, or you and Kay, or it's kind of the same little group, but at least the conversation has started. Now, as far as the kind of nuts and bolts practical stuff, I've yet to see a larger church organization step up and say, we're going to do X.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
individual churches have done that. There's wonderful examples all over the country, but it's been slow to get the movement going. I mean, there's a lot of stigma. Also, I think, unfortunately, kind of one of my beefs with the church, big church right now, big C church right now, is that we've become so program heavy to try to make people feel good,
Yep.
right kind of music,
Amen.
right kind of this, right kind of that. We don't serve people anymore. We don't
Amen.
serve hurting people
Yep.
anymore. We
In fact,
really
there's not
just
even
kind of-
time for the announcements regarding
there's
anything
no
you're
time.
doing
Yeah.
for hurting people. Yeah.
Yeah, there's no time for it. You spend churches spend an absolute fortune on worship, and and then they have then they'll not have a single support group at their church. I mean, so
Yep.
so the churches talk about community, and I'm talking about my own church too. So believe me, I don't go to the churches talk about community, but they're not talking about the community. They're talking about their own community, like
Yeah.
the community within the church. And that's, again, it's not trying to help the broken. It's and we also have kind of, I think we've missed the mark on what it really is to share the gospel. The gospel to us is the 4 spiritual laws or a story, and we forget that Jesus is very active in his ministry.
Yes.
He's healing people and comforting people and caring for people, and we've left all that out. And, gospel for us is, do you know my friend Jesus? And I'll tell you about him, and then I'm gone.
Yep.
Or a great sermon on Sunday morning, and then you come forward after the sermon. So we really, we've forgotten. But mental health is, to me, it's the great mission field of the 21st century.
Absolutely.
It's the divine opportunity for the church to just absolutely transform our culture. And I think, as I said, I think the conversation's at least begun.
I always say that the church has the hope that those who suffer from a mental health challenge need. And it's not
Absolutely.
wishful thinking hope, it's real hope, and it's like remarkable because if just rounding it up, but if 25% of your people had been struck with a certain kind of illness and another 25% of the kids and another 25 are dealing with their sick loved ones at home, you'd be preaching on it and having support groups and doing all kinds of things. And yet
Absolutely. Absolutely.
they just don't see it. It's invisible. What do you think a church looks like? Because I think part of the problem is we pastors, we're kind of told, at least for those of us who went to mainline denominational seminaries, I was very clearly told in all my pastoral counseling classes, and I took as many as I could because I loved those. Just don't have me translating Hebrew and Greek, and I'm fine. But I would be in those classes, and they would very clearly say, you do not do therapeutic counseling. You leave that to the professionals, you make referrals, et cetera, et cetera. And yet every time I turn around through the years, I found myself right at the scene of the car accident. People are bleeding to death. And I know that I'm not the doctor, but I got to get these people to the doctor like an EMT does. And I got to be able to do some triage or know where to take them, et cetera, et cetera. So what does it look like when a pastor and a church is able to do the emergency ground level work and get people to the care they need?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I mean, I don't think we need to ask pastors to be something they're not. We're
Right.
not asking them to become psychiatrists or
No.
psychologists. But I do think, one of the things that we've done is we've taken this kind of us against the world kind of approach to Christianity. So we want to kind of, in a sense, sterilize ourselves from the secular world.
Yeah.
When we do that, and I say that, so then we become this inclusive, disconnected organization. So we have no
Right.
connections to the community. So you show up with a problem that, and like you just said, I've been told, in seminary that I'm not supposed to deal with. I can offer pastoral care, spiritual guidance, comfort for your family, maybe some financial assistance, but I can't do anything beyond that for you.
Right.
If I'm not connected to the mental health community around me, in my local community, then I have nothing to offer you. And what's going to happen is, you're going to see kind of my frustration and inability to help you, and you're not going to come back.
Right.
So what it is there's a two-headed opportunity here for the church. If the faith community, number one, educates itself about mental health problems so it can recognize it, connects itself to the mental health community around it, so it vets mental health care providers, so it knows who it wants to refer to and who it doesn't want to refer
Absolutely.
to. It then is a nice entry point into the system. So the person who walks in and says, I'm really struggling with X, and then the pastor or the minister or the congregant lay counselor, whoever, recognizes and says, hey, you know what, let's get you over to talk to so-and-so. We work with them all the time. So now they're connected to that system. They're going to begin to get professional care. But in no way am I saying this is a pass the buck kind of thing, because
Right.
I often will quote, where Peter says to Jesus, these people are hungry. You need to send them away. And he says, well, you feed them.
Mm-hmm.
You're the one who recognized they were hungry. They told you they're hungry. You feed them.
Yep.
If people come to the church for help, the church should help them. So a referral is just part of the process. Now, what we want to do is we want to be able to offer them assistance right at the church. So we have support
Right.
groups. We have, whatever. We have Bible studies. We have people, lay counselors or pastoral care teams trained. We can help support their family. And so now the church becomes a healing community in which this person and family
Absolutely.
can recover.
It's
And
got
I
to
think that's what, God has called us to be.
absolutely a safe
So
place.
we're on both sides.
Yeah.
We're entry and we're long-term at the same time.
Yep. Yeah, just like we'd walk along anybody with a physical illness if they had cancer or
Absolutely.
something. Yeah.
And we do that every day with cancer, or someone has a baby, we do that, so really all I'm asking is that people educate themselves about mental health problems and treat people with mental health problems like they would treat someone with any physical illness.
Absolutely. And take a casserole, for heaven's sakes.
Absolutely. The no casserole illness.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
When you spoke in Houston at a conference that we were both at last March, I think it was, you said a statement that I've heard you say before, and I was like, oh, yeah, say that again. That mental illness is one of the few diseases where I won't finish it because I'm not sure I've got it right. You know which one I'm talking about?
Yeah, mental illness is it's the only disorder, only medical condition in which the damaged or disordered organ has to make the decisions about care.
Mm-hmm.
So, if you have liver cancer, you're going to have some symptoms and feel bad, and you go to the doctor and you find out you have liver cancer, and then you go, okay, well, then your brain says, hey, I need to get treatment for liver cancer. Let me
Right.
do that. Well, when your brain is messed up,
Yeah.
and your perceptions are off and your cognitions are off, it's your brain that has to decide, I need to go get some help. And sometimes you don't fully realize that you need to get help.
Yeah.
So that's what makes this really difficult.
Yep. Yeah. Certainly it's not your liver at that point that says, hey, I got to get help for my brain.
Absolutely.
It sure would be a lot easier.
It would be. And I don't think people just wake up in the morning and think, oh, well, I've got this is a mental health problem I'm dealing with. I think our thought is not, since we really don't educate our population about mental health issues are the last things we think about. So if you don't understand why you're not, you can't get up and go to work, or you don't
Right.
have any your mood is really down or whatever. Well, I mean, I think a man today, a middle-aged man or any man really in society today, they're more likely to think they have low testosterone,
Yeah.
which is just constantly on the, on the TV.
And
or
you
on
go
the
to one of
radio,
those male clinics.
those little clinics that
Yeah.
popped up. And the reality is what the research shows is that that's almost never an issue. It just really, it's almost a sham. It isn't that they don't test your testosterone. They do. But the reality is that the vast majority of men have perfectly normal levels of testosterone their entire life. And so, this man may very well be depressed, but you're not going to think, oh, I think I'm depressed. You're going to think you're sad, maybe, but you don't think of yourself as having a mental health problem.
Right, right. Yeah, or I'm just tired. I need more rest, or
I need to rest. Yeah, exactly. Or
I need a
eat better,
vacation.
or I need to,
Yeah.
Right.
Yep. Yeah. I kind of switching gears up a little bit here. Just yesterday, I saw on Facebook, and these podcasts are listened to year after year by various people, so it doesn't really matter what date or time it is now, because it'll be true next year at this time or whatever, I'm sure. But I read about the suicide of another senior pastor of a church out in Southern California. We had one here in Omaha recently where it was a youth pastor, and there had been 3 youth prior to that, et cetera, et cetera. What initiatives are you aware of involving both help for the clergy? Because as I understand it, we clergy are much more susceptible to secondhand trauma, et cetera, as well as a higher rate of depression than the general population. I'm not sure that's accurate, but that's what I've been told. Are you aware of any initiatives out there that are going to be really helping clergy?
Yeah, it's a difficult group to figure out because they don't really volunteer to be in studies because again, pastors lose their job over being depressed.
Absolutely.
So I've known pastors that have gone to the next town over to get treatment because they don't want anybody to find out.
Yep.
And they notoriously don't go get help. And so, no, I mean, one of the things we did on the Gateway, Mental Health Gateway, was we have a place for clergy to, if they're themselves struggling, that they can connect with somebody to talk to somebody about getting some care. There really aren't a lot of initiatives, to say truth. I mean, there is a suggestion that perhaps clergy are experiencing depression at higher rates. There's certainly data that suggests they do not access care at the same rates, that they're much lower.
I'm
rates.
sure not.
And their family as well. That's
Yep.
the other thing, is that it's not just them; it's their family too. So, unfortunately, there just really hasn't been anything yet. I mean, there's been such a struggle to get the traction in the church. Now, I will tell you, in churches where the pastor or senior leadership themselves have struggled with mental health problem, or someone in their family has struggled with it, those are the churches that have jumped on board early.
Yep, I believe that,
because they recognize it.
Well, and
so,
you sometimes you have to, because, for instance, with me, I was the typical pastor that wasn't going to talk about it. I'll never forget, I was at a seminar and a buddy of mine looked at me in a circle of friends and he said, "So Brad, when are you going to work on your issues?" And all I could think of was, how dare you say that to me? I don't have any issues. It was like, you think you have this facade up that because you got to be strong, you got to be the one who's, whatever. And finally, when I was so broken, and God knew that it would take a very public situation for me to even be open and transparent about it, then you have nothing to lose. But you feel like you have everything to lose prior to that.
Right. And I think it's important to remember and remind everybody that, while we're having this great conversation right now about the church and mental health, and you have a ministry and I have a ministry and you got this great podcast and all this stuff to get information out. There are pastors out there at this very moment, here in the U.S. in not in some extremist church, but there are pastors out there right now telling somebody that their depression is a result of their faith, that their bipolar disorder is a sin, that they shouldn't take psychiatric medication, but they would be perfectly fine with them taking medication for anything else.
Yeah.
I mean, that's happening out there right now.
Yep. Yep. And if they're saying that to the member that comes or the person that comes to them, they're also saying that to themselves and their family.
Absolutely. And and that's also whether they're overtly talking about psychiatric or mental health issues from the pulpit, it comes out in that presentation as well. And so I mean so there as long as that's out there, and there's some prominent Christian authors and teachers that expound that idea, and so it's so the stigma is heavy in the general population. It's very heavy in the church as well, and so trying to get traction here is you're almost fighting almost a theological battle.
Well, you are. That's
There really isn't a theology behind it, but it's presented that way.
Yep. There's no theological structure or theological systematic approach to understanding the brokenness of the brain theologically. And pastors get it theologically about the brokenness of our bodies, but they don't understand the difference between the mind and the brain. And I think that's one of the major challenges that I think those of us who are pastors really need to think about. And if you're a pastor listening to this and you have depression going on or struggles, reach out to people that you consider safe. Call the Hope and Healing Center or call us at Fresh Hope. We don't do the things that the Hope and Healing Center does, but at least we'll get you in touch with somebody. And at the Hope and Healing Center, hopefully they can call you from anywhere in the United States. And I'm sure Dr. Stanford's got enough connections or might know of people. But Pastor, don't suffer alone in silence. It's absolutely, you're not alone. There's many of us who have gone through what you're going through, and please don't do it alone. We would tell our people in a message or a sermon that, we're meant for community, et cetera, and that includes you, Pastor. So,
and I think the other important thing is that to let them know is that treatments work.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's not like we can't treat this stuff. It's not like this is some untreatable illness and oh my gosh, I'm sorry you have that. That's a death sentence.
Yeah.
Especially for things like depression and anxiety disorder, the vast majority of people that actually engage treatment, unfortunately, a very small minority do, but the vast majority of the people that do engage treatment get better.
Yep. I'm living proof of the fact that you can get better and stay better. I've had basically 14, 15 years now where there's been no major episode, no major issues, just your little hiccups here and there, and you get back up. And so, yeah, it works. Treatment works, and you're not alone. What has been your latest aha moment professionally related to your work? The latest aha.
That most people in the general population have no idea how support groups are meaningful, important, and can help people. It's just been really interesting as we've gone into churches and particularly we've run into a lot of different kind of cultural differences. But, having been trained in mental health, my thought is, support groups, everybody understands that if you sit around, talk about your problems with people with a shared experience, that's helpful. But it's almost, and I also thought, well, since the church is so used to having groups like Bible studies and small groups, that it'll be a very easy transition. But,
sure.
Really been surprised by people just kind of blankly staring at you like, well, why would we want to have a support group? I don't understand why we'd even want to do that. So,
do you think that's... Go ahead.
That's just been kind of the more recently, that's something that we've been talking about around here and one of the things we've done to overcome that is we haven't actually done anything with it yet. We're about to bring it out, but we've just finished a Bible study that's really just a Sunday school class, basically. That a church can offer, that anyone could come to, but it's on mental health, and then from there they could transition into more of a support group style. So try to kind of bridge the gap.
Well, I'd really like to know how to get our hands on that, because we've got this webinar that on September 6th here coming up soon, and it's on how to preach about mental illness. And Amy's doing that again for us. And so maybe off the podcast, you and I can talk about where to find that. Where would that be placed in the future? Do you know that people could go to it online at your website?
I think it's going to be. I think it'll ultimately be on the Mental Health Gateway.
Okay.
I think we're going to pilot it at first through a few churches before we put it out there. But ultimately everything's going to be on the Mental Health Gateway. That ultimately, even all the support group material and everything will be on the Mental Health Gateway.
Great.
But it's just a process of kind of rolling it out.
Great. So last question. What do you know today that you wish you would have known 20 years ago?
Well, I don't know if I'd want to know. I was going to say, I would say that, changing the world is not as easy as it seems when you just you think you have a great idea. But I'm glad I didn't know that 20 years ago, because I don't think I'd be where I am today, because I would have never done it.
You would have said, if it's that difficult, I'm out.
I think, honestly, I think that I have I have a greater appreciation for my wife today than I did 20 years ago. And I think I wish I had even, not that I didn't appreciate her then, but I think I really, I appreciate her now really for, all the things that I do. I'm really able and allowed to do those things because she, cares for our family and our children and does a lot of things that, really gives me the time to travel and to write and to things like that. And so, I think it's been a great partnership, and I guess I wish I had that appreciation for her back then that I have for her now.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for taking your time to do this interview. I appreciate it. For those of you who are listening, I know that many of you have a diagnosis, and many of you love someone who has a diagnosis. And I guess, Dr. Sanford, I'd like you to just speak to those folks for a second. Any kind of words of encouragement or hope that you might give to them?
Yeah, I would just tell them, what I tell clients every day here, and that is that, regardless of how difficult their circumstances are right now, or how difficult their loved one is, how much they're struggling, they can be better than they are today. There's no doubt. And it's just about engaging care and finding good quality care. And it's about understanding that recovery is a process that takes time. And when you're thinking about mental health problems, you need to think in months to years, not days to week. It's a slow process, but with support and the right care, people do recover.
Mm-hmm. And if you think you can't, then you probably can't. I find that our thinking has a lot to do with it, how we look at it. I don't like
absolutely. You have to believe. You have to have hope, and I think that's really the great aspect about the church, and that's why I think the church is so important in this, and that because there's nowhere else in the culture where you can receive a hope that transcends circumstances,
right.
A hope that is unchanging, and despite what your symptoms may be at the moment. So, Jesus Christ is our hope, and that's the great foundation to build our recovery on as well.
And that hope is really a choice. You got to choose it in spite of how you might feel, especially if you're suffering while listening to this. Even when I did not feel like God loved me or was with me, I still had to push through and just say, He does. I just don't feel it. And well, would you mind closing us out with a word of prayer?
Father, I just lift up all those that are listening, and I just pray that you would be present with them in a very tangible way, that you would calm their hearts, that you would lead them to care, that you would open the hearts and minds of pastors, that they might become equipped, and that indeed they might step into that divine opportunity you have presented to us, that the church can really lead our culture in helping people with mental health problems. And Lord, I just pray for Brad's ministry, that you just bless it, Lord, and that it would multiply, and that you would be glorified, and that your broken children would be mended. Praise in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. I appreciate your friendship, and I'm excited about what you're doing there at the Hope and Healing Center. What's the website that they can visit one more time?
Yeah, they can either go to hopeandhealingcenter.org, which is our main website, or the one that's specifically for the faith community training or to find services, that's mentalhealthgateway.org.
All right. Well, there you have it, my friends who are listening. We want to thank you for being with us in this edition of Fresh Hope for Mental Health, and I pray that it's been helpful to you. We'd really love to hear from you. Maybe you have a question for Dr. Stanford or myself, or comments or insights, or maybe you'd like to share your story on our program. Just write me at Pastor Brad at freshhope.us, and we'd love to touch base with you. And you could also even leave a voicemail message on our podcast website, freshhopeformentalhealth.com. And we'd love to connect with you on social media. And I know Dr. Stanford's on social media, as well as the Hope and Healing Center most likely is. We have videos available on YouTube and all kinds of other resources. As I'm sure if you Google Dr. Stanford's name, you'll find videos and talks or presentations he's given at other conferences. So if you'd like to know more about a Fresh Hope for Mental Health support group or other support groups that they have at the Hope and Healing Center, I'd encourage you to check those out. People helping people who have lived experience really does work. Please be sure and tell your friends about this podcast. And until the next time, may the Lord fill you with His hope, fresh and new daily. I'm Brad Hafs, your host, and this has been another edition of Fresh Hope for Mental Health.
You've been listening to Fresh Hope for Mental Health. If you have an opportunity, please review, share, and subscribe to the Fresh Hope for Mental Health podcast on iTunes or on the service that you use. We encourage you to share our podcast on social media with your friends and family. Previous podcasts of Fresh Hope for Mental Health can be found at freshhopeformentalhealth.com, iHeartRadio, Stitcher Radio, and iTunes. The Fresh Hope for Mental Health podcast is part of Fresh Hope. Fresh Hope is an international network of Christian mental health peer support groups which empower people to live well in spite of having a mental health diagnosis. For more information about Fresh Hope, go to freshhope.us. Fresh Hope is one of the leading networks of faith-based peer support groups internationally. Our host, Brad Hafs, is founder and president of Fresh Hope. He is a pastor who is living well in spite of having bipolar disorder. Brad is the author of the book Fresh Hope for Living Well, which is available at Amazon.com. Brad is also a speaker, blogger, hope coach, and mental health advocate. You can find more out about Brad by going to bradhafs.com. Hafs is spelled Hoefs. If you or someone you know is interested in attending a Fresh Hope group meeting, go to freshhope.us and click on Find a Group. Not only do we have local groups, but we also offer Fresh Hope groups online also. If you're interested in starting a Fresh Hope group in your community, email us at info@freshhope.us.